You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast. My name is Brady, joined in studio by Billy Galenko, and Billy is sporting a new button-down shirt, looks like.
No, this is a nice old flannel, but I am wearing my blue Vint hat. You guys, I don't know if I've mentioned it on the last podcast, but Trials and Tribulations, we had a piece of OG Vint merch. The very first thing that Nick and Patrick spot us was a tan Vint hat, and I think I've lost it, so I've reverted to wearing this blue hat. It just doesn't feel right.
It's still vintage, though. It has the old Vint logo, the early days Vint logo. And I've got the throwback Orioles cap on today. Third place team in baseball, second in the American League. You like to see it.
I'm done talking about baseball. The Pirates have reverted to their old ways. They're horrible.
A quick comeback down to reality.
Yeah. I will say, speaking of not coming back down to reality, you guys may have noticed the Vint Marketplace is our presenting sponsor now, and the new website's been live for a little over a couple weeks now, and it's really going well. So thanks to everybody who's checked us out. Getting a lot of support calls, but it's really exciting to see the new site up and running and really growing quickly. So it's great.
Yeah, it's cool that we have these different aspects of just the umbrella Vint business, the investment side. Now, like this kind of direct retail side is really cool to see. Obviously, those businesses complement each other well, and so we're excited to have our first sponsor and to be able to provide that for ourselves this time is cool.
What's fun is I'm mainly the support person, so if you want to call and chat with me, go ahead. But I get to chat wine stuff with people, and it's nice because sometimes I had a guy call today, and you guys have a couple vintages of this Barolo that I was really looking for a while, and you guys, I'm so excited you guys have it. And I was like, that's great. But then he just wanted to keep talking about it. He's like, so we went there a couple years ago, and I really liked it. And I was like, nice. I went there last year and we did this.
He should come on the podcast.
Yeah, no, he didn't even want to just talk about buying stuff. He just wanted to BS about wine, which I like to do. So it's been fun. But yeah, it's been an exciting little week there.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with not only like the quantity of assets and breadth of assets across the fine and rare space, but also just the pricing I think is really strong. So shout out to you guys being able to provide a lot of value, I think, across all those assets. So it's really cool.
Speaking about pricing, nice. Speaking about pricing, I have a small beef with wine pricing. I was at K&L last week, and this isn't a K&L pricing thing. They actually have really cool tastings out here in LA, Fridays and Saturdays. So I was actually there for a cool Louis Roederer tasting. We got to taste my first Cristal, which was cool. We tasted through there. They had a Brut Nature, their vintage rosé, an assemblage offering. I can't remember what it was called. And then they had their Cristal. So that was really cool. It was 2015, so it's not like 2008 or 2013 or some of these, even 2012, that are showing a little bit better, but it was just neat to have. I actually learned, I love these little historical tidbits. They won, I guess, the bottle. I've always known champagne has this link to the Russian czars. They've always loved it. They tend to like the sweeter wines. But apparently Cristal, the shape of it and the color of it was crafted in conjunction with them. Basically, the Tsar was paranoid about being killed or something, so they wanted their champagne with a smaller punt at the bottom, that hole. So Cristal has a very shallow, it's almost flat bottom, which I didn't know. And then also it's a clear bottle. And I've always wondered that because it's weird, because the whole reason they're green or even brown is to keep the UV rays out. But that's why they put that tacky orange cellophane around it, is it blocks the sun before the wine drink. I always thought it was just weird decoration, but it does something. So I was like, this is cool.
So it means don't buy Cristal without the orange wrapper around it if you're buying it off a retail shelf, right?
Pretty much, yeah, off a retail shelf.
Probably don't buy a Cristal off a retail shelf anyways. I don't know, maybe. But
wherever it is, make sure it's protected from sunlight, wherever you're buying it from, if it's not in that thing. But yeah, anyway, back to my beef, though. I was wandering around, as I do at K&L. They have a great selection of an in-person. I'm talking like how we're talking about the Vint Marketplace, but Australian wine prices is really what I'm getting down to. Is I walk by and there's a few wines that I had while I was there. Toll Puddle, for example, is a Tasmanian wine. It's Tasmanian grapes. I think they're actually made on the mainland. Great Chardonnays, great Pinot Noirs, and then also Clonakilla is another winery that I went to twice while I was there. It's outside of Canberra, and these wines were like, I think now when I can't remember what they were priced when we were there. I was just there last weekend. Maybe it was like 40 or $50 for the Toll Puddle and 86 or something for the Clonakilla. And I will say the Clonakilla is a really cool Shiraz Viognier. It's supposed to be like a Northern Rhone. Really great wine. But when I was getting in Australia, I mean, I was there. Obviously, it's cheaper there. It was like, I don't know, 20, $30 a bottle for their good stuff. And then you got back to the US and it was like 40 or 50. And I was like, all right, upper 30s, 40s. And I was like, that's more than I was paying there, but this is a great wine. Toll Puddle was fine. But now, like, that same bottle is like 85, $90 there for the Clonakilla. And then the Toll Puddle's pushing 50, whereas like it used to be 25, 30. I don't know if this is inflation or people just actually appreciating the quality, which it makes sense, but it's a shame because I'm like, I would walk by the Clonakilla and be like, you know what, maybe I would go a little higher, get a $40 bottle because I know it's really good. Now I'm like, I don't want to pay like $90 for it. That's crazy.
Yeah, I bought a $45 Tasmanian white wine this weekend, and I don't have it here in front of me. I should have known that would be of interest to you. But
of course, I only drove around the whole island by myself tasting.
Yeah, it's my first Tasmanian wine. Well, yeah, I was told, I picked it up and I had 4 or 5 other bottles that I was like trying to decide on, and I was like, wait, I asked the shop owner, is this the one I should get? And he was like, oh yeah, without a doubt, don't even think about the others. So that's what I did.
We're going to have to talk about it in the next episode because I think I'm one of the few people you may know who can chat about the subregions of Tasmania.
It's not Riesling, is it? There's no, like, they don't grow Riesling there.
They do grow some. Okay. It's primarily Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, but my favorite Australian Rieslings are from there because they taste more German than they do Australian.
You have to see. I forget now what it is, but it's in a Riesling type bottle, which is why I said here, just trying to think Riesling. But anyways.
Either way, that's exciting. I'm happy everybody should drink more Tasmanian wine. Some of my favorites. But thanks for listening to my TED Talk there.
Yeah, maybe they figured out that they're like, man, it's a really long ways to ship this stuff and to distribute it out to North America. Got to raise the prices. Maybe it's just that catching up.
Yeah, from the Australian, I would happily pay for a wider selection of Tasmanian wines. Just the Australian wines, yeah, I guess they don't make that much of it. There were some fires out by Canberra, so that Clonakilla was impacted. So that's fine. I think luckily the quality is there. It's just one of those gems where I feel like the old guys used to buy Burgundy for $20. It's people are. Sure, yeah. I just hope it doesn't keep going. So
that'll be 15 years from now when all the natural, like, low intervention wines are $50. They start at $40, $50 a bottle.
Speaking of that, though, so other things that I had that were interesting this weekend, I had a Maloof Pinot Gris. Maloof is from Willamette Valley. They're one of the best producers out there. I've had some tastes of their wines, but never a full bottle. So we had a Pinot Gris at this sushi place that was pretty great. And I also had a Cremant de Jura there as well from Robinet. That was really cool. So those are a couple other exciting wines from the weekend.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, we got to get together with one half of the Vint team. So there were 6 of us here on the East Coast. Just right now, I guess for the next month, there'll be 6 of us here. So I went down to Richmond to meet with the Richmond team. We went out to dinner and brought some wine along. We had a 2018, I believe it was, or 2017 Barbersville Nascent, which is, I believe, Albarino, Vermentino, and the F Italian word. Can you say it for me?
The F Italian word?
Yeah.
Fano?
No, Fugliano? Is it Fugliano?
I have no idea.
Come on now. You're leaving me. Yeah, it's crazy because
are you sure?
I probably tasted 24 wines of this variety at the Volcanic Wine Conference last week too.
Suave?
No. I'm gonna go grab it. Give me a sec.
Okay. Falangina. I bet it's Falangina before he comes back. Let's see if it's Falangina. All right, I told the listeners what I think it is while you were gone. Let's see if it is.
Yeah, I wonder how much of what I say on this podcast is just absolutely wrong. Because this Barbersville Nation, which is a Virginia producer's flagship white wine, supposed to be their ageable white. It's actually Viognier, Vermentino, and Falangina.
Okay, that's what I told the listeners. Yeah. I thought it was Falangina. That was
and then the
my brain.
Tasmanian wine is a Riesling. It's a 2021 Coal River Valley Wild Ferment Stargazer from...
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a great producer. Yeah, Coal River Valley is in the south more, closer to Hobart. It's not like it gets a little warmer, so my favorite wines are a little bit more around the perimeters, but definitely great wine.
Yeah, this
actually Cold Puddle
Valentino Viognier Vermentino from Virginia is so good. It is crazy. Yeah, I had it like 2 years ago when it was first bottled. I think this is the first vintage, 2018. They just started making it recently. I think they hold it back a little bit. I think they hold it back 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. But
nice. And now that I think about it, I think Cold Puddle is actually, it's like northwest of Coal River. It might be technically in the Coal River Valley. So I guess I do like that area. Fun facts though, Brady, yeah, I think you should mention that you went to the Volcanic Wine Festival and give us a little, or conference, and give us a little rundown. But the reason that Brady had Falangina there is that's commonly grown in Campania in that area all around Mount Vesuvius. Some people say it's one of these ancient varieties that has been grown since Roman times even. So really flourishes in volcanic soils.
Yeah, we got invited by John Szabo, who we had on the podcast to talk about volcanic wines. And he's definitely one of the global leaders in bringing that side of the industry to the forefront, and producers who specialize in wines from areas with that kind of terroir to the forefront. So I think this was the 4th or 5th year that they've done it. I don't know if that sounds right to you.
Yeah, I think they had a little pause during the pandemic, but then
that's right. Yeah. So up. It's definitely like within the last 10 years, they've started up this more of a coalition around these producers. And so went up there to New York to that little conference and had several dozen producers and distributors there with the wines. So obviously had the tasting portion, but then had these kind of breakout sessions, workshops, I guess you call them. Had some on the Aegean and Santorini. I went to one on that. Then had the actual opening session was a professor from Duke, a neuroscientist from Duke, came in and gave like a 30-minute talk on like sensory nerves and the olfactory sensory science, and just like basically the science behind how we go from smelling to tasting to defining a characteristic of a wine, but really focused on smell. And so he's working with lab rats on trying to understand better, what does it mean when we say, oh, something smells like X? So that was really informative conversation. Won't get too into the weeds, but yeah, doing some really cool stuff that I think, as we think about companies like Tastery, who we had on, who are developing sort of like a computerized nose of sorts, a lot of his research lends towards that kind of outcome and usage of that understanding. So it was really cool.
Nice.
Talked to John. He asked about you. I said he's traveling. He can only fit so much in his itinerary.
Yeah, we are. It's exciting. Looking forward to the 4th of July weekend. We're going to be going up to the Cascade Mountains in Washington State. Hopefully I'll have some Washington State wine. I don't really know what Seattle's scene is like. We're going out into like kind of the middle of nowhere, mountains. We're not camping, but close. I think they have vineyards out there, but it's like a region I've never heard of. I don't know if it's an actual AVA. Apparently there's a winery in this small town, so we might.
So when that happens, do you bring a bottle or two with you just in case you don't find anything interesting to make sure you have something, or do you wing it?
Nah, we're not that picky. We're going to wing it.
Yeah, well, nice.
That's part of the fun when you have to find stuff out of necessity. I think this might be interesting because I think if you listen to a lot of other wine podcasts, I think you'll hear people talking about, what vintage of X producer from Burgundy they had. Instead, it's just, I'm going to go out into the woods, and if they make some wine from random grapes they find, then cool, I will drink it and I'll report back. So
I say, remember your experience in Florida when you risked it all to have
the muscadine. Yeah,
the muscadine one. Yeah,
this won't be nearly that bad. That was wow. Speaking of that, I also did see a fully sparkling Ribolla Jala recently that brought me back to my gas station wine. Remember when I bought that $4 gas station wine? No, that was good wine. Yeah, that was a good sparkling Ribolla. So
I'm pretty sure I'm trying to remember now that like Falangina is back in my head. I think like the wine of the conference, from my perspective, was a sparkling Falangina.
I haven't had it in that way.
I'm pretty sure it was. I have pictures on my phone, and I'd have to run back through. But
some people say that Falangina either is or is a like descendant of the famous Falernum that was like the wine of the ancient times and the Roman times. Like I think I can't remember what vintage it is, but like the first noted vintage was a vintage of Falernum, and it was just like, oh wow, and yeah,
that's really cool. Yeah, it's definitely a category to stay on the lookout for, especially if maybe someone, I'm talking about volcanic wines here, if you're someone maybe who is skeptical of white wines, maybe you would categorize someone who only drinks red wines or only likes red wines. These are really, typically for me at least, really full-bodied, a little bit higher alcohol wines, especially from the Aegean and stuff, where I feel like I tend to drink most of them. Most of the wines I'm drinking are usually from Crete, Santorini, places like that, but I got introduced to a lot of great Italian wines. But yeah, the body and acid on these wines are great, and so I think is maybe an interesting transition away from red wines or red wines only for people, but could be off on that. That's the way I felt about it.
Nice.
That's not to say they only make white wines. Obviously, red wines are made out of these regions too, but
for sure, especially in Campania. Yeah, Campania. There's like Aglianico. Yeah, it's funny. There's nobody actually knows what was in that Roman wine. It could have been a mix of red and white grapes. Probably was. So apparently, the first vintage that was known though was 121 BC. Apparently, that slept and was possibly drank for decades, if not centuries after, in a time where people didn't age wine. Keep a lookout for if you find any 121 BC.
121 BC. That's the vintage you're looking for. If you can't drink 120 BC, you just need to stop collecting and drinking.
Yeah.
All right. That'll be our next collection. We'll have the BC collection, before Christ collection, and it'll just be all wines from.
It'll be grape seeds, and pumice from Israel. So speaking of aging wine, though, do we want to get into today's guest and his business? I found it absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, today we have Skyler Weeks, who's the founder and CEO of Rocky Mountain Barrel Company. And RMBC specializes in the sale of used barrels to, I guess, mainly whiskey and spirits producers around the world. Hesitating a little bit because they really have so many different applications in terms of what we talked about. And Skyler talked about who their clients are. But yeah, really interesting to hear about the kinds of producers and mainly distillers that he's able to work with and come in contact with, and how a lot of these, especially second use wine barrels and bourbon barrels, are being used in other parts of the market.
Yeah, and Brady actually organized this conversation, and I think the name Rocky Mountain Barrel Company really belies the breadth and extent to which this company really works. Like his company, they source barrels and sell barrels all over the world. They're sourcing everything, not just bourbon, not just wine. They're sourcing from Jerez, and they're sourcing sherry barrels. They're sourcing cognac barrels,
rum casks.
Casks. So before this episode, I didn't think about it, but turns out a lot of the things I find most interesting to drink are aged at some point in casks. Like he even goes to Mexico and drinks some mezcal and tequila. So he gets to go all over the world and go basically, and he also brings like a sommelier background. So he was going and tasting these spirits and being like, this would be good to age another one. But interacting between all of these things, he's not pigeonholing himself just in wine or just in whiskey. He's able to straddle all of these industries. And I thought it blew my mind as we were chatting. I was like, I want to do that. I might just leave Vint and go sell barrels.
Yeah, he gives a really compelling and interesting overview of their business and, like I said, the markets that they're in and how they compete in that space. It's really cool. But then also, like you said, on the side of kind of identifying what barrel are you going to pair with whatever product you're putting in it for finishing, like the science and art and craft behind that. And he brings some of his sommelier training, I think, to that part of the business, which was really cool to hear about as well.
Yeah. And something I didn't even think about, the difference between finishing and long-term storage. Like certain casks, even because they might be leaky or whatever was in them before, are perfect for finishing, whereas some are better for long-term. And I was like, there's a lot more detail goes on in these things than I thought about previously, and the shipping of them. And some of them still have live like bacteria. So he has to like refrigerate ship some casks. I didn't think about that either. But luckily, I got my one age-old question answered, and that was, when people ship casks to do aging, do they take them apart sometimes and like just have the staves and they reassemble them to make it easier to ship? And the answer is no, that's very difficult. Most people don't have the capabilities to put them back together. So these things are actually shipped full on barrels, and which makes it even more impressive.
Yeah, if you're just business minded and interested in the way that different businesses are set up, hearing them talk about how they manage some of that was interesting too, because obviously incur massive costs shipping those kinds of products around. Yeah, super glad to have Skyler Weeks on today. He is probably one of less than 100 folks in this side of the business that have companies of this sort of scale. So it's really cool to put a spotlight on it, and as their wine and spirits adjacent. Enjoy this interview with Sky Weeks. Hey, Skyler, thanks so much for joining us. Yeah, man, this is cool. I feel like we've been saying this a lot recently because we've been touching so many folks from different parts of kind of the industry, but this really is, I think, a unique sort of conversation we're having today. Why don't you tell or not our customers, tell our listeners.
Yeah, definitely. We started up about 15 years ago. We're a full-service barrel brokerage firm, so we are the direct link in between distillers and winemakers and other distillers and other beverage producers. So we sell new and used oak vessels, whether it's casks, small cask, foeders, large oak tanks, to a secondary market to be refilled and used again.
So how many of these, we talked a little bit about this before we got on, but how many of these barrels are you seeing come through this brokerage chain, call it, year to year?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to tell.
Into
there's different segments of it. You have the bourbon market, obviously, in Kentucky and Tennessee, and then you have the Napa Valley, the wine barrel market and everything. Each year, there's millions of barrels dumped. It's hard to know how many kind of go through the broker's hands. Any decent-sized brokers are usually selling in between probably 50 to 150,000 casks a year, depending on quality and quantity overseas, obviously. The vast majority of the secondhand market of these casks is overseas, especially in Scotland and Asia, those kind of places in there.
And so these are like, you would call them finishing casks. Most people, using these casks, I guess, maybe in Scotland, they're using them
but
as
outside of there,
primary
it's primarily vessel, like you said, a finishing.
Right. Okay.
So you were saying there's like a number of regions you're pulling from, obviously ex-bourbon, Napa. Obviously, you mentioned like sherry. So can you tell us all the regions you're kind of pulling from? And also, I'm curious where you're pulling foeders from.
Us and what keeps separating us from all the different competition out there is that the number of different barrels that we actually find and can sell is just outrageous. We're pulling barrels out of the Caribbean for beautiful rum casks, both agricole and molasses based. We work really dedicatedly in the Jerez de la Triangle of Spain. So we have Oloroso, PX, Fino, and Amontillado sherry casks, Tawny, Ruby, and White port, as well as Madeira out of Portugal. In France, we're some of the leaders of XO cognac casks, Sauternes, AOC certified, late harvest muscat, brandy, those kind of things. And then obviously up in Scotland, whiskey barrels, Sochu casks out of Asia, and basically tequila in Mexico as well. So basically, if booze hits a barrel, there's a pretty good chance that we sell it.
Wow.
And I'd assume that both, sorry, I think it's the touch of a leg. I'd assume that most of the time a client is coming to you looking for something specific, or is that not the case?
Really, we have strategically placed warehouses all over the U.S. and all over Europe. And so what we actually do is we kind of gather what's ever fresh each week, and we throw it in a shipping container. And once that actually leaves, then we post it to a big e-blast list. And we say, here's some of the fresh barrels we have coming into our warehouses. Let us know what you want. So what kind of makes us special is if you're a distiller or a brewer looking for finishing casks, you can take your pick and you can say, I want 3 Madeira, 16 rum, 2 port, and 5 bourbon. And they all can actually ship out at the same time on the same truck. Whereas some of the other people will only sell one kind of SKU, or they only get in full container loads of one type of barrel. So it helps from a distiller's point of view to be able to say, I have couple thousand gallons of bourbon I want to finish. I'm going to do a third of it in port. I'm going to do a third of it in Oloroso sherry. I'm going to do a third of it in rum, and let's see what the differences are. And now you're starting to see companies like High West and some other ones where they're actually blending all those together. So you'll look on the back and it'll actually say finished in a selection of port casks, Oloroso sherry cask, and rum cask, for instance. So it really actually helps develop the profile and the palate actually of those bourbons.
Go ahead, Brady.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we'll clean up some of the lagging in post. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. This idea that you can go direct because you have facilities all over the world and you can get as close to these customers as possible. I'm sure they can put their hands and actually go in and see some of this physical inventory too because of that positioning. How much kind of direct interfacing do you get to do with these businesses? Maybe there's some trends that you're seeing depending regionally in the world.
We do. Our travel budget ends up being
now.
pretty big each year because we work in so many different countries, and mainly they're in Europe, and we're in Denver, so a lot of flying, obviously.
Yeah.
We got team members all over the world actually right now, and we only have 13 team members. One really big thing that starts being into play is freight costs. Bourbon barrel weighs 125 pounds, 3 foot by 2.5 foot roughly, and it takes up a lot of dense space in these freight containers. Most of the time, if you're only trying to ship a couple barrels or something like that, and you walk into UPS or FedEx or even DHL, you're going to be actually paying more for the shipping than actually the barrel itself. So that ends up being a huge, drastic cost for us. Was just all this freight everywhere because you can't take apart a barrel and ship it and put it back together unless you're pretty well versed in this kind of stuff. And so that was always been a big hiccup and continues to be a big hiccup all over the world and all this kind of stuff. When COVID happened and all the ports started shutting down, and then I don't know if you guys were all aware about all the LA port strikes and everything, and the Oakland port strikes and New Jersey's port strikes, it was really bad because now we just have cargo ships and container loads of barrels sitting off places that we can't do anything with. The finishing cask in particular, especially beverages like sauternes and sherries that are under 20% alcohol, have a shelf life, just like bananas if you ship them. So after a couple months in a shipping container, they turn into acetobacter and acetone on the inside, just like fingernail polish remover, and you can never get it out. And so that was a really big problem that we had to figure out and solve, was how we're going to actually do this kind of things without losing everything that we actually put into these casks. Yeah,
So
it was really figuring out the different shipping lanes. Just not selling some of these barrels for a couple months was one of the other big things we did. We found new customers in Europe where we didn't have to put them on ocean containers. So we just shipped directly from Spain to the customers. In the summer now, we ship in refrigerated containers. They're almost twice the cost, but you actually get to keep all your inventory, which is a great thing. And we 100% pre-sell a lot of these now. By the time we actually execute the order to buy these casks over in Europe, they're already all pre-sold here in the US. So that obviously helps a lot as well. As far as new trends going on and everything, when we started, it was primarily selling to the craft brewing industry for sour beers, lambic beers, and bourbon barrel aged beers. Now that that's fallen off a cliff, we're almost solely focused on distillers. Bourbon and just brown spirits in general seem like they're riding a huge high right now. It's been going crazy for the last couple of years, especially the craft distillery and the micro distillery section. Our customer base has definitely been expanding, so that's a lot of fun getting to meet a lot of new people.
I have 2 questions. So one, I was curious about the whether you take them apart, just ship the staves and the whole versus the whole barrel. I think that's really interesting. I guess you do need a cooper to put them back together. And then 2, sochu. I didn't know they actually age sochu in.
It's really rare as far as I'm not super well versed in it. We have some agents on the ground over there. And whenever we're offered them, we're only offered a handful of casks. So it's nothing like a bourbon kind of business or anything like that, to my knowledge of it. As far as building up the barrel and taking them apart, you're exactly right. You need a full service cooperage to do these kind of things. Barrels are held together primarily with hydration of the staves pressing against the hoops. So once you take away that water and the moisture in the staves, they just fall apart. To put them back together, like you said, you need a lot of practice, and here's a dedication to do it.
The span in terms of pricing that someone could expect, fully delivered to their facility, a couple hundred.
I can't really speak as far as the delivered price because you could be down the street or you could pay halfway around the globe. For bourbon barrels, it's around $200 a barrel for number 1 grade select barrels right off the line from Jim Beam, Heaven Hill, Wild Turkey, Jack Daniel's, something like that.
Yeah,
and then our casks go all the way up to almost $1,000 for a certified, written off sherry cask certified by the Spanish government, those kind of things. And all the other casks fall in between. It depends on how many years the cask's been used, if there's a brand name involved in it, and then obviously how much want there is and how many other competitors obviously have the inventory.
Is there much business to do in just the general, maybe hospitality, restaurant, or even like residential space selling?
That's how we started
just
off.
casks
I
to
kind of have a weird
people
backstory. I was
who aren't gonna
actually a
use
professional
them?
rock climber and needed to figure out a way to make a couple bucks. So I went to culinary school and started cooking, doing that stuff, and I fell into the wine industry through the International Wine Guild, where I went and got my level 1, level 2 sommelier certification. Started working at a small little retail wine shop and did some wine blending for some people out here in Colorado and got paid in a couple barrels one day. Put them up on Craigslist when I got back up to Denver. I had 2 of them and I woke up with 146 emails. And it was all 100% residential, people looking to chop them up for planters, rain barrels, using the staves for that kind of stuff, because Home Depot out here doesn't sell them. The lawn and garden shops don't sell them. And if you try buying a single wine barrel on eBay or Amazon now, you're paying hundreds of dollars in freight. And I was selling these for $45 a barrel. So that's actually solely was my customer base. I didn't have any employees for the first 6 years. We just purely just sold in U-Haul style. I'd bring up one every week or two, and I'd just sell them to all the residential kind of people making rain barrels and those kind of things. It wasn't until year 3 or 4 when I think I got my first semi-load on Napa Valley and started knocking on doors at some of the larger breweries in town. Avery Brewing was probably the biggest, my first best customer, and some other guys like that. And like I said, from there, I met people like Stranahan's that were in Denver. And then we started getting a couple more employees. And then we started going to these large trade shows, like the Craft Brewers Convention and the American Distillers Association conventions and those kind of things. 15 years ago, there wasn't a lot of people doing this.
Yeah. How did you expand? I was gonna say, how did you expand internationally? Where was it you supplying and then getting connections, or was it getting
people
the
finding
supply
my
and then
website,
selling
people finding the
internationally?
website saying, "Hey, I'm over here. I'm looking for these kind of casks. Can you help?" That was the biggest thing. And I really truly think that a lot of the stuff in the beginning really revolved around coming back to that freight. These are craft breweries in London looking for sherry casks or something like that, but they can't afford 100 sherry casks that fit in a semi truck, and they only need 3 sherry casks. So they'd come to me and say, "We can't do this. We don't have the budget to fly down there. We don't have the budget to ship them back. We just need 3. What can you do?" So I remember sending out tons of emails saying, maybe there's a Brewers Guild around you. Bring it up at your monthly meeting. See who else is interested, so we can ship you a semi load, and on your loading dock, everybody can pick it up in their back of their pickup truck. Here's 3 barrels each for 20 breweries. And so that's purely what we did for a couple of years, was just kind of, we got more brewers to talk to each other and distillers to talk to each other, and we'd put in one big order, and then we'd have them just separated out on their loading dock or something like that.
How did you identify this? I guess you knew that this international market existed for finishing casks, but how do you break into that market?
Yeah.
I think he's told us you're in over 60 different countries now. What's that process like in terms
we
of
got
just
a great
like business
team.
development? If you can talk
3
on that
full-time
level.
salary sales guys and women working for us right now. And a lot of it now is just reaching out and just saying, we've been doing this for a long time. We're really good at what we do. We have in-house logistics. But not only that, we've developed just great partnerships with these wineries and distilleries that we're actually sourcing from over the years. And so we can really talk to, hey, we were just down in Barbados last month, and we were at the distilleries, and this is exactly the barrels that they're releasing in a couple of years. And we can talk about the flavor profile and the nuances of everything. One thing that really helped me stand out in the beginning was I was the only guy in the industry that was also a sommelier. My palate was trained, my nose was trained, so I could actually pick up a glass of bourbon or a glass of one of their lambic beers or something like that. And I could point out why I think that a tawny port instead of a ruby port barrel would be good for finishing your whiskey. And so I think that really kind of helped us out. And I've tried to develop my team's senses with that as well. Like talk the talk and say, here's what I'm picking up on a palate level with this bourbon. Here's why we think that this cask would be better than the other cask. Yeah.
That's cool.
On a wine nerd side of things, this podcast has heard me say many times that I love sherry, but not enough people do, and that the barrel business is what's keeping them in business. Can you validate that and elaborate a little bit, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. For the longest time, I think Scotland was keeping sherry alive. You got those big producers out there just fill up used sherry casks every day. And whenever I'm over there, I keep hearing, at least from people, saying that the wineries can make more money off the casks than the sherry themselves, for sure. You have 2 different sides when it comes to sherry. You have what we call the historic casks, and those are the sherry casks that are black on the outside. They've been used for 20 to 30 or 40 years even. They're almost falling apart. They take a long time to repair, but you have a lot of that sherry juice just soaked into those staves. And some people love them, some people hate them. They have a lot more tendency to leak. So it depends. If you're a brewer, the chances of you aging a beer over a couple months is basically zero, unless it's a big bourbon barrel aged stout or something. If you're just trying to finish in a sherry cask or an old or tawny port cask or rum cask, usually it's just to get a little hint of that at the end of the flavor profile. Versus if you're doing a long age Scotch finish or something like that, and one of these sherry casks, you'd want what's called a certified cask. And these ones are coming out. It's a brand new barrel, and they use it for about 12 to 24 months. And then they dump it and fill it up in Scotland or fill it somewhere else in the world right away. It's a much greater chance of knowing exactly the flavor profile, because not very much can happen in those 12 to 24 months outside of what's normal. If you're having one of these old casks, who knows what could have happened in the last 4 decades in this cellar, you know what I mean? So you don't really sure if one cask is going to taste the same as the other cask right next to it.
Which sherry casks are the most in demand? Is it the Amontillado, the Oloroso?
I'd say Oloroso and the PX sherry for sure. Amontillado maybe third, and we almost don't sell any of the Fino sherry, just because I don't personally think it really does a lot. I think Oloroso is probably number one because of the history background around it. It's what Scotland's been using for years and years. Petrozima's sherry is, if you've ever had it, it's like pancake syrup when it comes out. It's so viscous, it's ridiculous. So whatever it touches, it's going to gain a lot of sweetness right away as well. I kind of selling it as a blending one. Let's throw in one PX sherry for every couple other ones, and then at the end of it, you can blend it back. So.
Sounds like more of your job than I imagined is this kind of consulting on the sort of profile that the producer is trying to get to. Is that right in saying that? Is that primary function?
Yeah, it definitely used to be. So,
at this point,
now that we have such a good team working with us, I'm not doing as much of that as I used to anymore. My job's kind of more on the sourcing side now, especially in Napa Valley and overseas and those kind of places. When wind got out about a decade ago that a lot more people were starting to use cask, a lot more kind of shady brokers came on the marketplace, and shady producers is trying to falsify stuff. There's sadly in the wine industry and in the liquor industry worldwide, there's not a lot of actual laws that says you have to be truthful about how long a beverage sat in this cask to sell it. So if you're out in Napa Valley, you could sell me a wine barrel and say it was used for 12 years, or you could say it was used for 4 years, and there's no legality around it. There's no history around it. There's no proof of it at all. For wine barrels, it doesn't matter quite as much. If we're over in Sauternes, or if we're in Cognac especially, or if we're in Spain or places like that, it's really easy to kind of, like I said, falsify those records. And we're talking a lot of money for every single one of these barrels here.
I saw recently a Foursquare finished whiskey from Bardstown. I don't know if you know the Discovery or Collectors or whatever it's called series from Bardstown did a Foursquare rum cask finished stuff. And I was just thinking that I feel like we don't often see these sort of direct collaborations where they're actually bringing in the name of that like finishing cask. I think that's really interesting, especially when you think about, I don't know, Screaming Eagle, Echem, these sort of huge names on either side. Is it really just folks not wanting to complicate those relationships?
I don't really know. I think, like you said,
why don't we see that more often? You think
something to that? Maybe it's something on the monetary side where they feel privileged to actually get something out there. Or it could even be the downside. What happens if it doesn't taste good? And then they probably don't want their brand name all over the label as well. But you're right. You don't see it very often. Usually whenever I've heard it actually happening, it's usually friends in the industry or something like that. But you never really hear about it too often, at least on my side, where somebody specifically asks for, I want a rum barrel, but I only want it from Foursquare or something like that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. What are the big opportunities, do you think, in terms of, I know you've been in business for 15 years. It sounds did that pivot, right, from residential and maybe local sales now to you're in 68 different countries. Is there a next frontier in terms of the way that your business operates?
Yeah, we just keep getting bigger each year.
That you're seeing start to emerge?
Trying to tackle more of the inventory out of Kentucky. Obviously, each year we're just trying to gather more and more of that. We're 100% sold out this year, and we're basically 100% sold out for next year as far as some of our barrel allotments go. There's more every year, especially starting about 3 years ago, there's more demand for barrels and less barrels being let go. So you got kind of the two wrong sides of the math curve working for you. There's just so many international distilleries, especially in Asia, popping up that are just massive. And the bourbon producers are gobbling up different distilleries overseas, especially in Canada and India right now. So they're taking a lot of these barrels off of the marketplace to brokers or even just direct sales, and they're keeping them internal. When these big guys buy other brands that also utilize ex-bourbon barrels, they obviously don't sell them, they just transfer them internally. So those barrels go off the marketplace. Yet we're still getting calls from these new distillers who need the bourbons, even on top of our current customer list.
Cool. Can you elaborate a little bit on where you're seeing a lot of the growth or demand in Asia? Is it just Japan and like Taiwan where people know famous whiskey producers, or you mentioned India?
We're
Is there some in China?
We're seeing China as the biggest one right now for sure. China is just massively growing with their distilleries, and the thirst is just outrageous for how many they actually need. China as well, on the wine side, is gaining a ton of traction. They have a monster amount of wineries over there and vineyards planted. Japan and South Korea right behind. Australia, we do a ton of business in. And then even Colombia, Brazil, Nicaragua, Panama, Barbados, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, all those guys down there are still making just as much rum as they used to be. And all those rum barrels are all ex-bourbon barrels.
So do you feel like you're buying as much as you possibly can right now? You said that you're out maybe like a year in orders.
For ex-bourbon barrels, we're getting tight for sure. We're obviously being creative, and we're gathering new vendors almost every week right now. It just kind of depends on it. There's certain liquors out there that only get released in every certain months. Sauternes doesn't release barrels each month. Cognac usually doesn't. And some of these other European countries and everything like that. I could say that today and tomorrow we can get a new allotment or things like that. But like I said, you kind of got to be smart in this business about pre-buying too much because, like I said, they have a shelf life, just like bananas or lettuce or something like that. So we've been burned before where we buy them and they sit around the warehouse until they go bad, and then you have to chop them up into planters and you lose a bunch of money. So we don't obviously want to go down that road again.
On a personal side, what are you most excited about? What kind of finish have you tasted recently? Been like, wow, I didn't think that was going to be a combo I liked.
My favorite stuff lately has probably been some of this stuff High West is putting out. The Midnight Summer's Dream kind of labels. I don't remember which act it was, Act 8 or Act 9. They did a white port finish that was just awesome, I thought. I don't know if they're making their own juice or if they're buying their juice, but it's definitely amazing. Some of Foursquare's finishes that they've been doing are really cool. If you go down there, you talk to Richard Seal, the owner down there, his patience with this rum is just outrageous. He has no problem at all just letting it go for almost 2 decades in a barrel. While these other guys are trying to figure out ways they can harvest barrels sooner, get them on the shelves and everything like that. He just has these stockpiles and stockpiles of barrels, and I don't even know how he even keeps them all straight at this point, but he's just doing so much cool stuff with cognac, ex-Madeira, ex-wine barrels sometimes, and some other stuff that's just been really fun to hang out with.
Nice. Do you ever, in terms of your own wine or spirits exploration, has your business, I'm sure it has, expanded kind of your interest around the world?
It's been really interesting. When I got into it, I was a big wine guy. I'm a little bit of a beer guy, but I didn't really have the opportunity to taste a bunch of stuff is probably one big thing, especially liquors like Calvados, something like that, where I had absolutely nothing to do with it. All of a sudden, I'm super immersed in it. I'm tasting through barrel samples and stuff like that, having no idea what I'm doing in these basements in Normandy, France and stuff. So that was just eye-opening how just specific and how beautiful some of these really minute spirits can actually be. Cognac's another great one. I love visiting each year when I go over there and doing barrel samples and those kind of things. But more than anything, I think I'm just so thankful that I've been able to experience some of these places like the Douro Valley, just sipping a glass of Tawny Port in Porto on the bridge there, and being in Spain or Barbados, wherever it is, just hanging out with the locals and walking through the sugarcane fields and stuff like that, and actually just being able to experience these kind of things, I think has really helped our team to really preach about these barrels.
Go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, no, I guess I had a few questions coming off the back of that. One, it's more just from a travel wine kind of question. One, is the Douro Valley as pretty as everybody says? Two, do you have a favorite Calvados producer now? Because I'm a big fan as well.
I don't, and I also don't speak French, and so I would probably butcher it and embarrass myself. But the Douro Valley is outstanding. I've been lucky the times I've been there for good weather. It blows your mind when you're there, especially if you've only ever visited like Napa Valley or something like that. It's literally sometimes they have to use dynamite to blow holes to plant these vines. It looks like concrete, like clay colored concrete, and it just doesn't look even possible to grow a vine there. And all of a sudden they're growing grapes there. Twisty, tiny little roads, just a lot of fun for sure. I was over in Elba. Barolo has always been my favorite wine. And so a couple of years ago, we went over there, my wife now and I, to get engaged over there. And that was really a cool experience too, driving around and meeting all these different producers in Elba and the Piedmont region and everything.
Nice. When I was in Scotland a number of years ago now, I guess it's over 5, my favorite Scotch I was just like blind tasting. It was actually a Scotch aged in a Barolo barrel.
Really?
So
nice, yeah.
There's also something there.
Barolo is so dry and so tannic. I think it really lends itself to, the Scotch for sure.
And then you said that you went to culinary school.
Yeah,
you spend
it's really a hobby
kind of
now
a hobby
that my
in
family
terms
gets
of,
to enjoy.
are you doing a lot of cooking these days? You're too busy
I grew up in kitchens, working as a dishwasher at early age, 14, biking over to the restaurant and flip burgers at a dollar burger joint in Minnesota for a while in high school. And throughout college, I worked in different restaurants and resorts around Colorado. From the day I graduated culinary school, I actually have not worked professionally in a kitchen since then. I went straight from there into the wine school and then kind of into the wine industry with the wine shop. But that was a lot of fun because we do weekly little sheets with here's 3 wines of the week and here's some recipes prepared by Chef Skyler Weeks to highlight the nuances of the food. And then that was a really fun kind of deal, kind of pairing it together. So I definitely miss it sometimes, but I don't miss the hours and the long nights and the mandatory weekends and holidays and those kind of things. So much rather hang out with distillers and brewers.
Yeah. Did you do a CMS?
I did a local
WSET,
one here called the International
what
Wine Guild. Education did you and I liked it a little bit more. They were just kind of getting off their feet, I think, but it was very hands-on. It was 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, intensive stuff, intensive tastings every day, but you actually had an instructor every single day. They went on field trips, those kind of things, versus some of those other programs like study at home, study by yourself, and then you just kind of show up and take a test. I knew I was never going to be a master somm. I didn't want to do it for a living in a restaurant. I was really just doing it for the education. And so that's the route I went, just because it was a lot more hands-on. I didn't think that I'd probably have the patience to do it on my own.
Yeah. Billy is well on his way through the WSET. And I'm in the middling grounds, but probably won't go super far.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
We talk about wine.
I always
wine
say the wine's one of the things that the more you know, the more you learn that you don't know. You study on Italy for 4 months, and then 2,500 DOCs or something, grape varietals, and then all of a sudden you feel like useless because you don't even know what 2,400 of them are.
Yeah, and I really like what you were saying about the hands-on training. Before doing the WSET, I started on the CMS track and did up to the certified, but I was just reading, which was really interesting. But when it came to, I passed the certified without having tasted like 30, 40, 50% of like even the macro regions of the best wines in the world. It sounds like what you were doing was actually like really helpful in terms of like training your palate.
Yeah, awesome. Nobody can afford to drink or taste that much wine. But you only need a 2-ounce pour to taste it. You don't need to buy the whole bottle, which you have to do on your own. So that's what's so cool about this class is every day you taste 30 or 40 wines. And they can split the cost up of everybody, so it's actually not too bad.
Yeah, I was just in New York scrabbling, trying to find bottles to be able to afford it, anything. Yeah. So,
yeah. I started at Trader Joe's. I bought like a dozen bottles. It was like $70. I was like, man, this is going to be like the best education. And then shoot, I'm missing like you said, 40 different regions. Yeah, you said that you want to, in terms of the business side, the plan is just to continue growing. Can you do that with your team of 13
start expanding
now,
or we're so heavy overseas and everything. I think a lot of it would be building up some more satellite offices in areas where our customers are all together, probably. Really developing a better relationship with some of these larger producers that we work with. And then I think we got to figure out how long this bourbon and brown spirit train is going to last. That's a really big thing, too. We don't want something to happen like the craft beer industry where it just drops off a cliff, which I don't foresee happening. But you're also seeing a lot of these really large guys just racking up production right now, and you're wondering why. Everybody you talk to in Kentucky right now is putting away more barrels than they ever have. And obviously they need to age for 4 to 6 years. So we're going to kind of see what the marketplace is like in 4 to 6 years from now. Maybe there's going to be some new names out there that nobody's ever heard of that comes out just swinging. So that'll be really interesting.
Yeah, we were at Buffalo Trace a few months ago.
It's ridiculous.
They say they're putting up like 15 new brick houses or something.
Just blows your mind. So just that alone, unreal. Think about how many barrels of whiskey that's going to be on the market. All these guys are smart. Like, they're not doing this just on a wolf on a bet. Like, they got hard data that says in 4 to 6 years, people are going to be drinking all this stuff. It's going to be interesting unless they got whole rick houses of Pappy out there that we just don't know about.
Yeah, I was just sitting out with some buddies on the sidewalk at 4 a.m. the other day, and one guy just ended up with a bottle of Blanton's, which is just crazy that there's so much demand for a
that's the whole other side of the bourbon industry, right? Is that how many hundreds of these producers have never actually made a drop of what you're drinking? It all comes from either MGP, OZ Tyler, Bardstown, one of these big contract distillers. And I think some law just got passed finally. It just kind of says somewhere on the bottle, it does need to say produced by and bottled by and those kind of things actually on the label. But it is a huge growing segment in the industry, I'd say, for sure.
You have to be a collector at this point with all of your different travels and exposure to different kinds of things. What do you snap up when you get the chance to, or are you getting stuff to you by clients and stuff?
I have a couple 750s of Chateau Yquem that I bought a couple decades ago, drunkenly at a Denver Broncos game. So those things are definitely hanging out with me for a while. I have a bunch of beautiful bottles of Gaia I've aging away for Barolo. And then I have a couple verticals of Dom in the cellar. As far as Pinot Noir goes, I'm a big Oregon fan, so a bunch of Ken Wright stuff, aging away, and then a bunch of Dominus and some other stuff. As far as the spirit size goes, that's the one that's been pretty depleted now. I got some Weller and some Bland's, like you said, but that's about it. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I have a problem with buying too much whiskey because it's like every time I see something that I feel like I'm not going to have access to in 4 years, even if it's like super cheap or even if it's more expensive, I snap it up. I don't know if I'm ever going to sell it. Probably not, because I keep opening it every time I get home.
And I don't know.
I need to be a little bit more
from the
strategic.
Travels and everything, from all the barrel samples, sometimes it doesn't taste the same when you're getting out of a bottle, I guess. And I think a lot of it has to do with the ambiance, and you're in a musty cave in Cognac, shivering because it's so cold, and you're over there in February, and you have something that warms you up, even though it's 8 a.m. and stuff. And then you come back home and you taste it, just doesn't quite taste the same. But it's cool memories that'll last a lifetime.
That's right. Sure. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I feel like we get to do some pretty cool stuff here, but I love hearing about your side of the business, and that's awesome. Some of the travels and stuff you get. I definitely think there's probably some opportunity in terms of, like you said, that middle ground between the original producer, you as a broker, and then the folks who are using it as like a finishing cask. There has to be some kind of opportunity for investors along the way there. So I think that's just interesting to think about. Yeah, we'll catch up with you again.
All right, thanks,
we'll catch up with you again soon. Best of luck through the rest of the year.
All right, that was our interview with Sky from Rocky Mountain Barrel Company. I hope everybody else thoroughly enjoyed that like I did and learned that I wasn't just making it up when I said the sherry industry is really being buoyed by the Scotch industry. So nice to be validated there. And you will be further validated yourself next week when you come back for our next episode. Cheers.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.